How do we get to the point where stay-at-home moms became enemies of the feminist movement, where the work of raising children is seen as less valuable than climbing the corporate ladder? You know the moment. You're at a social gathering and someone asks, "So what do you do?" You say you're at home with your kids and the room goes quiet, blank stares, maybe even judgment, especially from other women. If that's you, it can feel like you're doing something wrong by attending to your children full time. And if you're the one giving that reaction, you might rattle off all the reasons career should come first. But here's the problem. When we diminish the work of parenting, it doesn't just drive women into identity crises. It makes kids suffer. When we treat parenting as secondary, children absorb that ambivalence, especially in the earliest years when a child's brain is still being formed. And when those children grow up to become tomorrow's leaders, carrying fragile mental health, poor resilience, and broken attachment patterns, society starts to go off the rails. And for a topic this urgent, we knew we needed to sit with someone who could cut through the noise. Komisar is a feminist icon in the truest sense, an entrepreneur, a psychoanalyst, and a cultural voice who celebrates the fact that women now have choice. She doesn't believe every woman should have children, but she's unapologetic about this. If you do, the first years carry consequences our culture can't afford to ignore. Over the last 2 years, millions of people have tuned into her interviews, drawn to her rare mix of honesty and expertise. And after decades of guiding families through the hidden forces that shape children, she spent her career showing what it takes to raise kids who are secure, resilient, and ready to inherit the world. If you're new to Mighty Pursuit, we exist to help you make sense of the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, not as vague wellness cliches, but as deeply interconnected parts of your everyday experience. We believe putting the whole person back together is a key to living well. Today's episode zooms into our purpose category, exploring what it means to carry the higher calling of raising children. But it also speaks into wisdom, asking what it means to raise kids well in a culture that's forgotten how. If you're searching for clarity on your own purpose and value, this conversation won't just affirm you, it will reframe how you see the work of parenting itself. So take a breath and let's begin. Erica, in your book, you tell the story of Charlotte, a magazine editor with the kind of career that many people would envy. But after her second child was born, she gave it up to stay home, foregoing the opportunities that were in front of her. And when you spoke with her, she said something striking. She said, "I love staying home. I wouldn't feel any conflict if society didn't tell me it was wrong. Wherever you turn, society tells stay-at-home moms that we are not contributing to society or we are less than working mothers. That's part of the problem, if you ask me." And so that word contribution really struck me. What do you think her story reveals about how we measure value in modern life?
So I think that the second wave of feminism was the beginning of a narrative that we still live by today. Well, women live by, but men live by too. It certainly contributed to the narrative that work and materialism was the most important thing in life, existed even amongst men before. But I think, but the feminist movement definitely changed the narrative and said that work is the most important part of life. So Freud always said you need love and meaningful work to be happy, but he always said love first, a relational life. He did say you need meaningful work. And for many women in Victorian times, meaningful work was raising children and being a linchpin in your community and caring for other people than just your immediate family. And but he always said love first, but we've become a work and love kind of society. And I do think that the narrative changed in the feminist movement, changed that narrative, which is it told women that their work of raising children was not meaningful, was not valuable, did not contribute to society, like going out and competing with men and making money and being recognized and seen and famous and powerful. And so, it was a narrative that was so pervasive in society that women who didn't want that narrative were bullied into that narrative. So the irony of all things is that feminism was meant to give women choices so they could choose to I mean, who would ever want women to stay home and care for children and have children and take care of them if they desperately didn't want to? We're not a fascist society, But the idea is that I think there was a study that came out that said that 60% of women in America, actually 66 in the UK, but 60% of women in America wanted to stay home with their young children if they were given the opportunity, either financially or with emotional support from their families. Financial support from the government, emotional support from their families. But that says that 40%. So that number gives me hope, even though we have an abysmal policy in our country. We're like the most uncivilized country in the world, I think, that we don't give paid leave for at least a year.
Well, I think that there's like a lot of mixed messages about children in general. For example, if you announce you're having a kid on social media, right? You post that. If it's your personal account, it's probably going to be like your highest engaging post of like the entire year. Tons and tons of comments like, oh my God, congratulations. And so it does seem like it's valued at some level. But then like in the example of Charlotte, if a woman decides to focus her time on then tending to that baby that she's about to have and like trying to raise that child well, it seems like at some level it's met with scorn. And so how do you explain that contradiction?
Penelope Leach said before me, she distinguished between, she made the distinction between having children and caring for them. And she said very clearly, if you don't want to care for your children, your own children, don't have children, because children need for you to want to care for them. Not all mothers can. There are really poor mothers who can't care for their own children. They're just trying to pay a rent to keep a roof over. They're single mothers whose husbands have left them and they're trying to just pay the rent and feed their children. But for everyone else, it is this, I think it's the idea that, we want to have children, like having possessions. It almost feels like a societal pressure to have children, but it's the caring for children that really counts and really matters if you want to raise healthy children. And we don't tell women that, and we don't tell men that. When I was young, I'm old now, but when I was a young woman in, I think, middle school, we had home ec. Now you may go, ugh, home ec, that's way backward and, But in fact, it wasn't just for girls, it was for boys too. It was everyone. Everyone had to do home ec, boys and girls. And you learned how to write a check. You learned how to manage the finances in a home. You learned how to bake bread, boys and girls. You learned how to care for a baby together. So it was so interesting because it was very instructive. What it did is it focused on family and home as the most important part of life for boys and girls. And then I'm not sure any schools do home ec anymore. And the thing is, because they considered it backward or anti-feminist, but it was for boys and girls. It was a way to say, family has got to be a very important part of your life plan to be happy. Again, you may not want children, but you may want to be loved. You may want to get married. You may want a partnership, So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many parallels with that in marriage, if you think about it, because, the wedding industry is huge in America, right? So you'll spend tens of thousands, if not more than $100,000 on a wedding. And so there's like all this celebration up front. But it seems like there's not as much care, a thought that's went into, okay, how do I actually like sustain this marriage over a period of like 30, 40 years, and the skills that would actually be required. And so when you think about like that gap, like the celebration of a kid up front, and then maybe the neglect of what comes after, what sort of expectations do you think people carry into having a baby, and how does that actually square with what's actually required for raising them?
I think that, again, the false narratives, well, maybe it's not even a narrative. I don't think we tell young people anything about it. I think they just have fantasies about it. They idealize it. They think I'm going to have a baby and nothing's going to change in my very self-focused life, and I can work just as hard. I can take as many vacations. I'll be as free. Somebody else will care for my baby. They're really clueless. I find that young people today are absolutely clueless as to what it takes to both, have children and raise them. And so when it happens to them, there's been this huge uptick of postpartum depression. And I think it's because they're not told anything, right? They're not educated about what it takes to, raise a healthy child, and how much you have to be there, and how much stress you put on yourself as a woman when you promise your husband or your partner that nothing will change, because everything changes when you have a baby. Everything, including your bra size. That's just the beginning. Everything changes. Your perspective on life as a father too changes. You're not, so Erik Erikson said that you go through developmental phases, and the generative phase is a very important thing. But he talked about the phases, but then didn't, but what does that mean to be generative? What does that mean to bring a life into this world? The first time you look at your baby in your bed, you and your partner, and you say, oh my God, this is real. This baby is here to stay, and we are responsible for this little person, and they will be dependent on us till we die. And that reckoning, it either transforms parents in the best of ways, or it creates a deep chasm between reality and expectations. We say depression lies in the space where our expectations and reality are not even close.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about what the consequences are of not putting the proper value on parenting or having the right expectations, but it seems like postpartum is one of them.
Well, again, postpartum is, let me put it this way. If you take the stress away from a woman when she has a baby, and you say you can relax into this beautiful experience, it's not beautiful for everyone. Some women have more or less beautiful experiences of childbirth. But once you have the baby and you connect with the baby, if you say to a woman that this is an experience you can relax into, there's no pressure to run back to a job. There's no pressure for this experience to be perfect. There's no pressure to be a full-time mom and a full-time working person outside. You just say, relax and enjoy this experience, and let this experience be transformative and be your only experience right now. We don't give women that first year to 3 years of allowing them to really enjoy mothering. We push them back into the workforce as quickly as possible, both societally and also financially. And then there's a pressure from the moment they give birth to that baby that the clock is ticking. And that actually changes the whole experience of bonding and attachment. It doesn't leave the choice for women to want to stay home with their children after that year. So, in fact, if we created the experience that we used to have for women, it's not like there was ever the good old days, but this part of it was the good old days, that there wasn't any pressure for women to have to be somewhere else, doing something else with someone else. They just could be with their baby and feel admired for being with their baby, and also admire their baby. So they could be in that experience and not feel pressured to be someplace else. When you're stressed as a new mother, it affects your mood. It affects your milk production. So today there are all these mothers that are saying, I'm not producing enough milk and I have to have lactation specialists. This was never a thing. Yes, there were mothers who had trouble, but most mothers did not have trouble. I mean, we are biologically designed to feed our own babies. So, but stress, cortisol, affects milk production. So mothers are stressed from the moment they're born that they shouldn't be, the clock is ticking. They've got to go back to work, or there's a perfectionistic attitude about mothering, which also can cause a tremendous amount of stress.
Yeah, I mean, some of that's from obviously the consequences from the mother's vantage point, but then when you go switch to the kids, if you don't have the right value on parenting or expectations, what does that end up doing to our children?
Right. So if we're not present physically and emotionally enough in the first 3 years, so we say by the end of 3 years, 85% of your right or social emotional brain is developed. And your environment has everything to do with the healthy development of that right brain, which is responsible for things like emotional regulation and the ability to cope with stress and adversity, the ability to read social cues, the ability to, eventually things like judgment and executive functioning and all these things, impulse control. These are all right brain functions. And so we know that if your primary attachment figure is present and sensitive and empathic and nurturing, it helps to architect that part of the brain so it flourishes. So much so that between 3 and 9, it keeps growing until it's sort of overgrows, like a garden that's overgrown. And then in adolescence, there's a pruning period. But throughout childhood, if you don't have parents to help you regulate your emotions, to help buffer you from stress in the beginning and then incrementally expose you to stress, but also help you process stress, then it's like expecting children to be like self-cleaning ovens, which is sort of what we expect them to be. But they're not. They're born incredibly neurologically fragile, without the ability to regulate their emotions, without the ability to cope with stress or adversity. They are incredibly raw. And it's only through that early relationship with their parents and their primary attachment figure in particular that they form the foundation for a life of being able to regulate emotions, of being able to cope with stress. So we're kind of doing it all wrong now.
Yeah, I think kind of resolving this, obviously, the point of your book is like addressing this conflict is one of the most pressing issues that we have today. And I don't know if you can do that unless you really examine the narratives that we've been giving and the myths surrounding the subject, and kind of the pain some of that came out of. And you mentioned feminism before, but that is kind of at the forefront of this conversation. And so if you go back 100 years when maybe women couldn't work or they weren't paid equally and were told their only value was like a wife and mother, what do you feel like feminism got right?
The first wave of feminism was very pro-maternity. The first feminists had children, many of them, and loved their children and prioritized their children. But they wanted women to have choice and be recognized for their intellectual abilities and their capacity to work outside the home. And so they were definitely, on the right track. The second wave feminists also did a lot of good. They brought the idea of women being able to have a choice not to have children, not to get married, to have linear careers like many men. And so, they did also a great thing for society. They just went too far in not recognizing what the early feminists did recognize, which is that relationships come first. They didn't recognize that. They told women to prioritize working outside the home over everything else, instead of saying, those of you with young children, their life is full of seasons. Women have more seasons in their life than men do. And you can have a wonderful career and be part of society outside of the home. And then when you have children, you can pause, you can lay down your arms for a while and be with your baby and, really relax into the role of and what's such an important role of creating the next generation of emotionally healthy human beings. And then come back to your work outside the home when your children need you less, or, titrate your work down so it's not so intense. So in the years that you're raising children, the interesting part of your life is not your work outside the home, but your children, right? So people always come to me and say, how do you raise children with good self-esteem? I say, you have to be more interested in them than anything else.
You mentioned the fact that like the message went too far. And so at what point do you think it started to morph, and what do you feel like the catalyst for that was?
So a lot of the early feminists didn't have children. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. I think it's, you're telling women when you've made the choice not to have children that your children will be just fine, and put them into daycare and somebody else can take care of them. And, that was sort of the message, that you're not part of this movement unless you're out in the world competing with men. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that was the misstep of feminism, second wave feminism. Instead, they should have said, I think, you have the choice to work out in the world, and you should take advantage of that choice. But don't try to be better than men. Try to be the best women you can be and show society how amazing women are. And instead it said, go into the workforce and compete with men and be better than men at being men. Women have an incredible capacity for nurturing, for empathy, for leadership through relational leadership in a way that men never did. And so there was an opportunity there to not abandon your children, but to create work and support work for women that didn't make them abandon their children. So there was an opportunity there that was missed. But I think a lot of the early feminists, if they could look at the second wave of feminism, would say, you missed the mark when you told women to ignore their children.
Yeah. No, I feel like that's a really honest take, because, there were so many legitimate grievances 100 years. It's just like absurd to think about like a country where like a woman couldn't vote or like be in charge of her own bank account, all these different things that you look at it today, you're like, how is that the way society was? But I think the pendulum swinging, I think, is interesting, because across the board, like sexually, so many different ways that men and women are kind of different. And so like there's ways to lean into those differences in ways that we complement each other and form a better society. And then there's ways of kind of rejecting any sort of difference to the point where we're all trying to do the same thing and compete with each other and not work together. And it creates this kind of maybe unhealthy form of competition.
Well, it does. And it's why a lot of marriages fail. So I do couples therapy, and a lot of marriages fail because couples compete with one another. They don't act as teams. Mm-hmm. So in a company, you rarely have two CEOs because it doesn't work. You have a CEO and a CFO and a COO, and you have a head of marketing. And so the idea is that when you're raising children, you're a team, and you shouldn't do the same activities. You should divide and conquer. It doesn't mean that there can't be some overlap, but it's the divide and conquer that helps people not to compete with one another. So what you have today are women competing and saying, I don't know, he gets to go out every day and make money, and, and then the men saying, she gets to stay home with that baby, and I want to stay home with the baby. And, it's gotten to be a very competitive. So it's fine to be competitive. I'm competitive. I like playing tennis. Well, actually, I don't like playing games. I like just rallying. So maybe I'm not as competitive with that. But I think competition is good. You just don't want to bring it home. Leave it out in your work life. try not to bring it home.
Yeah, I mean, some of what you're saying feels so rational and logical, but it's in some ways a lot of people might get even offended by the message itself. I mean, one of the things that was shocking in your book is you had this quote of Beyonce, and she said, "Of everything I've accomplished, my proudest moment, hands down, is when I gave birth to my daughter, Blue." So it's just like a simple statement, right? And so then you quoted the response of, a journalist or online writer who said, "Wouldn't it be refreshing for one of the most professionally accomplished women in the world to value her career accomplishments equally?" So why do you think that statement itself has become so offensive to some people?
Again, I think people value their careers over relationships. I think we've become a very, how should I put it? We've become a very self-focused world. I think David Brooks just wrote a wonderful article about how, all of this individualism and all of this narcissism, it sort of has driven us away from a relational life. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the best way I can say it. I mean, I think meaningful work is important, but it should be completely outranked. Relationships should completely outrank your work, always. If your work outside the home, whatever your home is, again, you don't have to have children to be happy, but if your work outside the home is so much more important to you than what's at home, then something's wrong.
Hmm. One of the most common phrases that I've seen stay-at-home mothers complain about this label is they've been called sellouts or traitors to the feminist cause. And so why do you feel like there are like almost feelings of betrayal that other women might have towards women who do choose to stay home?
Again, I think there is this whole backlash now to women saying, again, I've been gaslit. I've been told that work should make me the happiest and I shouldn't want relationships. And this is what the feminist movement sort of promoted, that would make you happy. And so you have these highly successful women who are driven in their careers and at the top of the heap with their careers. But a lot of them are not really that happy. I know, because they end up coming to my practice and saying, I'm not happy. I couldn't find a partner. I didn't have children. I have all this money. I have a big house. I can travel when I want to, but I'm alone. And I'm not really happy. And I think there's an envy towards women who, so if you want to say, how do you have it all? You have it all by having a meaningful and loving relationship. And in my opinion, a family. But not everybody has to have a family. If you don't have children, there are other ways of having meaningful relationships. You can form extended family. But for me, having children has been the most meaningful part of my life. And for many women, it is the most meaningful. And men too. The healthy ones, it is a very meaningful part of life. You have to question what the word legacy means. What are you giving to this world and what are you leaving behind? Mm-hmm. So sure, you could start a nonprofit and you could have a company that makes billions of dollars. But in the end, what are you really leaving behind? You're leaving behind human beings on this earth. You're either leaving behind healthy ones or unhealthy ones, loved ones or unloved ones. And so I think there's envy between the women who are high-powered and unhappy or disconnected from their spouses and their children. And then they see women who are opting to prioritize relationships over work. And I think there's an unconscious envy. I don't know if it's conscious. I think it's more unconscious. Maybe it's conscious to some of them. But yeah, I think there's a kind of envy. Like, what do they have? Why would they want to do that? And I don't have that or feel that. We also have generational expression now, 3 or 4 generations of attachment disorders, where a lot of men and women can't feel deeply connected to their spouses. They can't feel that deep connection. They can't feel that deep connection to their children. There's a block there. They have children, they get married, but there's something that interferes with them really deeply connecting. So I would say envy.
Do you think there's almost like a regressive aspect of it, almost where if enough women made the decision to, like, up until 3 years old, to stay home with their kid, and we all do this as women, we're going to be pulled right back into like the 1920s. Do you think that's a legitimate fear or no?
No. I think the world has turned in a positive way, where women are encouraged to get education, they're encouraged to have careers. It's about seasons. And so if you encourage young women to be educated and choose a career and even develop their career in their 20s, and you say, pick what you want to do, develop it, and then when you have children, don't be afraid. Be courageous. Step back. Either step back and work less and be less important and do boring work in your work world, or take a pause and be with your children. And then come back to work when you feel that you've, given, particularly those early years, when you feel you've given what you needed to give to your children and to yourself. As your children grow older and become adolescents, slowly, incrementally, you can give more and more of yourself to the outside world. And then when you're an empty nester and you're perimenopausal and menopausal, I don't know, most people don't know this, but as men's testosterone is going down, as they get to be middle-aged, women's testosterone is going up.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so we don't talk about menopause because it's a dirty word like cancer or something, because we're such a youth-oriented society. But the truth is that women become powerful in menopause. They've raised their children. They feel good about raising their children. They've given what they needed to give. And now they can give back to the world. In Judaism, there's a story in the Torah. I can't remember. My rabbi tells the story of, of a man who, he's so big on giving to the world, giving to the world, and being a big deal in the world. And I think he goes to a rabbi, and the rabbi says something about the fact that you have to start giving to those closest to you before you give. So first you have to give to your immediate family. And then you have to give to your extended family. And then you give to your immediate community. And then you give to the larger community. And then you can give to the world. But to give to the world when you've neglected the people closest to you, that's not happiness.
It seems like our solution to resolving this tension is to kind of tell people they could have it all.
You can, just not at all at the same time. Again, think seasons. So if I were to say what the ideal would be, it would be for women to be educated and work when they're young and form their identity as professionals, and then feel that they can quit. Let them quit and find ways to encourage them to come back later and find pathways for them to come back later. Working in corporate structures has never worked for mothers. It doesn't work for mothers because you can't have someone else be your boss or be in control when you have children, because you need to be flexible and be in control of when you're there for your children. So the truth is, and nobody wants to really look at this, but corporate structures don't work for mothers. That may piss off a lot of people that hear this, but I would guess a lot of them would say, you're right. You need flexibility and control if you're going to have work when you're raising young children. You need to be able to drop everything, and you need to be able to, either be your own boss or have so much flexibility and control that, and that just isn't the way in these big corporate structures. So
yeah, you had this line in the book that I thought was really interesting, just about how many hours there are in a day.
Yeah.
And there's sort of like a logical fallacy. I mean, I even think about this like running this company. It's just like it's like to like run a company, like be a husband, be a father. Like there's just all these different roles, and then you have your friendships, and you're trying to take care of your health, and it's like there's so many things vying for your attention. And so I find there to be like a huge logical fallacy that you could like simultaneously do all these things well all at the same time and just be thriving and everything. I mean, something's going to be sacrificed.
Well, think about the pressure on men too today. I mean, it's not just women. I mean, there's so much. No wonder people are, falling like flies with depression and anxiety, and it's, equal opportunity depression and anxiety amongst men and women. The pressure to be everything all at the same time. Men didn't have a pressure to be, available to their children all the time, to be like women and to be, there was a simplicity to life. And, men who are filled with vasopressin, which is the protective aggressive hormone, were like, I'm going to take care of my kids. I'm going to make sure that they're provided for. I'm going to make sure my wife is provided for so she can take care of. It was like a team building exercise. And so, listen, in the 50s and 60s, fathers got home at 6 o'clock. Nobody was working as hard. Mm-hmm. That's the truth, that this whole kind of, work till you drop attitude that we have for the past, culture, 70 years has killed it's killing everybody. It's killing men. It's killing women, and that's not the American dream. The American dream was good enough so you could get home to your kids and have dinner with them and play baseball with them and go to their soccer practice and put them to bed. And that was the American dream.
Now, you said earlier that you didn't feel like every woman should have kids. I'm curious, like there's been so much that have been made about the birth rates in America. I think, let me pull it up. I mean, I think there's, the birth rates is down to like 1.6 babies.
Replacement rate,
Yeah. So, I mean, that's literally half of what it was.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I think Morgan Stanley just came out with a forecast that by 2030, women aged 29 to 44, 45% of them will be childless.
Yeah.
And so, do you see these as a positive sign in the sense that like society is taking the decision to have kids more seriously, or is it something to be concerned about?
I mean, listen, I suppose you could say that the replacement value, that the people who really want children and have children, and I'm trying to encourage those people who want children to also want to care for their children. Because if you want children, then you're halfway there to wanting to care for children. I'm not in this to convince anybody to have children. So I'm not really that pro-natality movement where you're trying to like encourage people to have children. No, I'm just here to educate people who want to have children about how to raise healthy children. The reality is, I suppose you could say, Darwin would say evolutionary selection means that the people who really want children and want to care for children will then pass down the desire to have children. There's this rabbi online who's so good, and he says, no wonder, young people today don't want to have children because their parents haven't taken much joy in having them and raising them, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a group of people, let's say 60% of the population, who actually want to have them and raise them and take joy in it, that's what will be passed down generationally. So we really don't want people who don't want children to have children, right? I mean, you don't want children. You can have, as I said, a happy but linear life without seasons. And you can, you could still be happy. But I think the concept is that, I don't think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a thing. And I think it's a thing that has to do with there's another piece of research that says that women will marry at their educational level and above. Men will marry at their educational level and below. So what we have is also society is sort of falling apart in terms of pairing. So it's not just about having children, because a lot of those women would say, well, I wanted to have a child, but I didn't meet a man that I could fall in love with and be with, right? So one, we've created a perfectionistic society that's imbalanced, that has more women today educated and in high power positions moving that direction than men. 60% of college students are women. 60% of medical students are women. More than, I think, 70% of veterinary medicine are women. I mean, it's on and on and on. You know, law schools too. There's been such a push to empower women. So the balance of society is so off that women won't marry men who are not as educated and powerful as they are. And so, yeah, you'd say, Houston, we have a problem.
Do you feel like there are some indicators that someone would be more suitable to have kids than maybe not, or things that they should be looking at in themselves before they decide to like make the decision?
I think sometimes by exploring and examining yourself before you have children, and really your motivations for having children, and exploring with your partner deeply motivations and also values and beliefs around raising children before you have children with someone is a very good idea. Meaning strategizing for a life is a very good idea. We do that with lots of things. I mean, look at all these commercials on television for financial advisors, and they're saying, well, if you want to pay for your daughter's wedding and, and if you want to take vacations and, you have to plan a life well lived. Okay. So why don't we plan a life well lived relationally? Right? Young people don't talk about, when they're dating, I want to have children. And if I have children, I don't know what I'm going to want to do, but I want to have the choice to stay home with my children. And that means in those years, I probably am not going to be making any money. And so I need a partner who's okay with that, and who not only is okay with it, but supports it if they know it's right for our children. And so that may mean that we have to save money for that time. It may mean that we have to do with less during that time. It may mean we don't buy our house when we're in our 20s or early 30s, that we have children and then buy a house later, So I think planning is a really important thing. And talking about I can't tell you how many couples come to me after the fact, after they have children, and say, she promised me that she would work and nothing would change and it would just be linear and everything, and now she wants to stay home and, what the hell, and so what, I have to work harder and we have a mortgage to pay. And, so these promises that young people make to themselves and to each other that are so unrealistic. In fact, I think it's very important for women to say to their partners, I don't know how I'm going to feel when I have a baby. And I may very well want to stay home with that baby. And if I do, I want the optionality to do that. And so what do we need to do as a couple to plan for that?
That one of the pushes I feel like that people feel externally pressured by, and maybe it's even said in good intentions, is kind of the line, there's never a right time to have a child. What are your thoughts on that sort of ideology?
I mean, I think there are better times to have a child than other times. I think if you're in the middle of a medical residency and you're working 14 hours a day and you're a woman, it might not be the best time to have a child, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that that's a false statement. I think there are better times. I mean, I suppose you could say we all make choices, and we are, as human beings, our choices. We are our choices and the choices we make. The choices of who we love, the choices of what kind of work we do, the choice of how we raise our children, the choice of whether we value relationships over work. We are our choices. And those choices, those are the most important choices in life. And those choices will dictate your forever happiness or not. So there's a lot of, those are high value choices.
Yeah, I love that you're helping people walk through this and navigate this and the expectations, because, and we'll get fully into that about what this actually entails about presence and raising a child. But I feel like if you don't, like we were saying, if you don't have the right expectations going into this experience, there's so many negative side effects to that. I mean, a lot of people will take the jump and they'll end up having a child. Would someone actually regret like having a child to begin with, or do you feel like there's a natural love that would then just outflow, even though maybe the circumstances weren't ideal under which you had the child, maybe you weren't parenting well to begin with, but it's something that most people eventually come around to? Or is it something that ends up being this thing that like you never really wanted it? And
I think you should listen to people's words as well as their actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father always said, don't listen to a man's words, listen to his actions. I actually think you need to listen to both, in men and women. If you're dating a woman and she says, I don't want to have children, believe her. Mm-hmm. Don't push her, don't force her. If you want to have children, find a woman who says, I do want to have children. I do want to be a sensitive, empathic mother to my children. I do want to breastfeed my children. Don't try to change the people you love, right? Now, there are some people, men and women, who don't know who they are. They marry too young. They marry before they know themselves. They have so much childhood loss and trauma that it's not until they have a child that they feel that transformative moment, or that moment of postpartum depression, which has to do with all of your past coming back and all of your relationships with your mother and your father coming back in that moment, you know. But for the most part, if your partner says to you, you know, you're madly in love with someone, but they say, and you want children desperately, and they say, I don't want children, listen to them. Go find a partner who shares a similar value system to you, a similar belief system to you. You know, I think it's interesting because marriage used to be about similarities, right? It used to be that you married people from the same culture, from the same religion, the same value system. And then it became incredibly exotic to marry people who were really different than you. Different cultures, different languages, different religions, different ethnicity, different values, you know, the fantasy of differences. The truth is that marriages work out and are more successful when there are more commonalities than there are differences.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we say that to young people either, that yes, you can bridge differences if you accept those differences. But the truth is that it's always better to have more similarities than it is to have more differences. And particularly when it comes to values and beliefs, and when in regards to children, around raising children and who's going to stay home with the child. And, you know, are you going to choose daycare? I hope, please God, no. But, you know, are you going to want to have, if you are going to work, who's going to care for that child? Or, you know, so this concept of really talking about important and meaningful things and finding commonality before you choose a partner to spend the rest of your life with and have children with them.
One of the beauties of like doing this podcast is you start to see many people start to say the same thing about certain subjects. And I think the values thing is like so true, because it's like you're trying to, you know, fit into this like a circle into this like square hole, like that doesn't work. And maybe early on in the relationship, you could ride on passion and all of these other things. But I think when there's like fundamental breakdowns in things like children, or maybe believe completely different things spiritually, and it's like tugging you apart of what you want to base your life on as a family, you know, there's these like big things that I feel like over time, I mean, the end destination is probably resentment, I would suppose.
I always use the analogy of a top-loading washing machine versus a front-loading washing machine. You know the difference?
Yeah.
So the top-loading washing machine is very hard on your clothes. It's got this thing in the middle, and it pulls them, it pulls them, it pulls them. And there's something very analogous to relationships that are passionate in your younger years where there are a lot of differences because there's a lot of tension. And the tension is exciting, But in the end, you want your marriage to be more like a front-loading washing machine. It's gentler on the clothes. It has nothing in the middle that's agitating it. And so that requires emotional maturity to not be craving tension and exoticism and, but to actually be looking for similarities. I mean, does that mean that if you're black, you have to marry a black person? No, it's not what it means at all. It means that you have to find the most important things that bond people together are values and beliefs. As you say, a spiritual bond is based on values, beliefs, respect, admiration, trust. These are the things that bond people together. But more similarities. I mean, the couples that I see that don't make it are the couples with more differences than similarities, and where the differences are so great that they can't bridge that. They can't accept the differences in the other. So you have to accept different. There's always going to be differences, even if you're from a similar background, even if you have a similar belief system, there's always going to be differences. And accepting those differences is what is the difference between a marriage working or not working. So for instance, if you, in regards to children, if you are a mother who wants to stay home with your children and breastfeed and securely attach and, but you're married to a man who, doesn't value breastfeeding, doesn't value your presence at home, doesn't value, says, I want to go away for the weekend, 2 months after having a baby. And what about me? And you're not paying attention to me. I mean, you have the agitator in the middle of the washing machine, right? There it is. Or a father who wants to sleep train a baby and a mother says, I'm never going to sleep train a baby because it's absolute personality suicide. And so there's the agitator, right? So a lot of these things are things that you can talk about before you have children. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these are conversations that certainly need to be had, probably aren't being had. And then you have this element of society conditioning people for what they should want. And so I feel like there are people who legitimately just don't want kids, but then there's other people who potentially would have that desire, but they're being told like that's not an important desire, or like they shouldn't have that desire. And so they feel at war and conflict with themselves. And so I think it's like having conversations that are wise and setting expectations, but then it's also examining kind of the messages that society is sending about these things. And if those things line up with what you authentically want at your core for your life, because like you said, relationships, whether that is marriage or with kids, it's like at the end of the day, if you're working yourself to the bone and you just have no close relationships, it's going to be like a really lonely place.
A pretty lonely life.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other aspect of society that I wanted to cover was, do you think that the conditions that surround parenting today make it almost impossible to do well? This has become such a big part of the conversation. It's not just society telling us what we should want, but also the fact is like rising cost of living, lack of systemic support. We talked about work pressures. Like, I'd imagine, I'm not a historian, but imagine a lot of these things didn't exist, or at least they existed at a lesser scale like 50 years ago. So what do you make around the surrounding dynamics?
Well, I spoke at a conference with someone who is involved in a more conservative think tank. I won't say a name. But they said to me, and I thought it was really true that part of our problem is that society's desires became greedy. So he said to me, it's not that, yes, it is expensive to have children, and yes, it's become harder to have one person working. But he said the reality is that people used to be satisfied with a 1,500 square foot house, or sharing one car, or not buying a home until they were older, or not going on vacations when they had little children, or they were willing to make sacrifices. It was almost organic that you made sacrifices. That the important thing was that you were able to give your children that primary attachment figure as their security. And so what's happened is people want 3,000 square foot houses. They want 2 cars. They want to take multiple vacations. Now, this isn't everyone. The standard of living, the cost of living has gone up for everyone. If you live in big cities like New York, it's so expensive to live here.
Yeah.
But again, the reality is if you move away from the fact that very poor people actually can raise their own children, people on welfare raise their own children. They're not working. They can raise their own children. Working poor can't raise their own children, and that's terrible. And that's because we have no paid leave. We have no paid leave. Again, that is a travesty in my opinion. Then you have the middle class and the upper middle class in America, and you'd say they have more choices than they admit. So, to compare yourself to someone who really doesn't have choices, like someone who's working poor, who is just fighting to put a roof over their children's head and say, well, I can't stay home because it's economic, our mortgage payment, or, I'm going to say that maybe you don't need the 3,000, and this is a harsh talk, right? Maybe you don't need the 3,000 square foot house. Maybe you don't need to buy a house right now. Maybe you don't need 2 cars. Maybe you don't need to take vacations when your kids are really little. You just, you go to the beach for the day. You sacrifice, the old-fashioned sacrifice. The definition of narcissism is not being able to take anything off the plate. Everything has to stay on the plate. I have to have everything, and I have to have everything now, and I have to have everything the way I want it now. It's the fantasy of having it all. And that's not emotional maturity, because emotional maturity is recognizing that there are seasons and there is a time for everything, but that life requires, the good stuff in life requires sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of negotiation that has to happen there of what you're willing to give up and what you're not willing to give up, combined with the fact of if you do or don't want to have children. And so that's just another thing. I mean, I was going to bring up the having it all kind of sentiment again, because it's not just I want to have it all, where I want to be a powerful career woman in my child, but then it's also financially I want to have it all. And what's interesting is, quote unquote, when you do have it all, I think you cited in your book, people that are extremely wealthy could have 3 nannies if they want, and they could just never parent their kids. So there's
they do.
Yeah. So there's an aspect of you have so much resource, you have so much material possession, and yet there's still a neglect happening to the child.
Yeah. There was a study done by a woman at Columbia who basically, the study said that the common ground with very poor children and very affluent children is they both suffered from the same degree and percentage of mental illness.
That's wild.
It has to do with neglect. Very poor children are neglected because of their circumstances. But very affluent children are also neglected because of their circumstances, just different circumstances.
So if someone's listening and they're on the fence about having a child, or maybe they have a toddler and they're starting to realize how overwhelming it could be. If we were to kind of help them understand what's required to do it well, what's the first thing that those people need to know about what they're getting into?
With toddlers or children in general, that children have a will of their own, that they're not narcissistic extensions of you, that they come into this world with their own personalities and their own desires and their own needs from the moment that they're born. And that sometimes with infants, because infants can be easier for some parents because they can be more compliant, not all of them. Very sensitive babies are not compliant. They are willful. They are developing personalities of their own. They are saying no. They are pushing you away and pulling you close and pushing you away and pulling you close. They are testing the boundaries. They are basically trying to find the balance between closeness and separateness and structure and freedom. And so that's all really hard. And so that's a very challenging point for parents. And if you have to have a lot of patience, you have to be very well educated as to what's going on, and you have to be very emotionally regulated as a person to be able to cope with a toddler.
I mean, how common is it for parents to feel ambivalence about the whole experience? Like moments where they question whether they really wanted children or wish they could escape that possibility, even temporarily, because I'd imagine like those kind of fleeting thoughts, is that a common aspect of early parenthood?
That they regret, that they...
Yeah, ambivalence over their own ability to parent, or if they were cut out for this, if they want children, or they made a mistake or something like that.
I mean, again, I think everything's so binary today that what we don't tell parents is that you're going to have boring moments, you're going to have challenging moments, you're going to have imperfect parenting moments. That doesn't make you a bad parent. The idea is that parenting is about good enough. It was, like Bruno Bedelheim's book says, good enough parenting. We're not looking for perfect parents. We're looking for good enough parents who try really hard. And so, so there has to be some forgiveness for the imperfections and it's hard. So I'll say that I think young people today don't have frustration tolerance, have emotional regulation issues themselves, don't have a lot of patience. Remember, part of, there was a book, Everything I Ever Learned, I learned in kindergarten, which talked about how in the early years, you learn the most important things in life. But in fact, in the first 3 years, you learn the most important things in life. You learn to regulate your emotions. You learn to wait, the marshmallow test. You learn to wait. You learn to deal with frustration. You learn to share. You learn to tolerate the word no. And you learn to adapt to structure. So these are like the things that are the most important things in life. And I think there's a lot of kids who weren't raised by their parents today, or were put in daycare, or raised by nannies, and don't have that early emotional regulation. So when they have a baby who's not doing what they want it to do, or is crying, or is keeping them up at night, they can't deal with the discomfort. They can't deal with they're impatient, they're intolerant, they can't deal with all of those things, again, are about emotional maturity and emotional regulation. And I think there's a lot of young people who just clearly don't have those characteristics today.
Well, it stems back to the kind of conditioning of society, but also it stems back to the scripts that they might have been handed from.
That's right.
From their own family tree. So
yeah, and they're not genetic. So just to be clear, this is the inheritance of acquired characteristics is what it's called. So generational expression of trauma. If you were not taught emotional regulation by your parents because your parents didn't really raise you. John Bowlby said that your primary attachment figure is the person throughout the day, from moment to moment, who provides you with soothing when you're in distress. That is your primary attachment figure. If you're gone 8 or 9 hours a day, are you doing the soothing from moment to moment and providing that child with soothing in distress?
Probably
No.
the nanny.
Probably the nanny. And when you come home and that baby turns towards the nanny and cries when the nanny leaves and fusses with you because they haven't been with you all day, then you have to understand that you have forsaken the role of primary attachment figure. And the problem then is that unless the nanny lives with you and you are really handing your baby over and saying, this is your baby now, and I'll just be the peripheral. I'll be like the grandmother. When the nanny leaves at the end of the day, the baby goes into shock. I've been with the nanny for 9 or 10 hours, and now where's my primary attachment figure?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that requires understanding a child's development through those first 3 years. And I mean, that's the crux of your book. So how should we be thinking about this in terms of their brain, in terms of their development, in terms of what they actually are needing?
Well, the first 3 years is what we call the first critical period of brain development. And we call it critical because it's so susceptible, the right brain, to the environment and to attachment security. So what we know is that from longitudinal studies that a child who does not develop that secure attachment in the first 3 years, 20 years later, will still 70 or 80% of them will still have insecure attachment. And that insecure attachment is correlated to mental illness, right? It's either depression or anxiety or personality disorders like borderline personality disorder or attentional issues. Those are all correlates to attachment disorders. So the first 3 years, so whenever I have a mother come up to me or a father come up to me at a cocktail party, because they know what I do, and they say, oh, I think we're going to, we put our child into daycare, or we gave our child to a nanny. They're not doing much. They're just, pooping and sleeping. And we're thinking maybe my wife will stay home, when the child is like really talking and interacting.
That's something I've actually thought, yeah.
So I put down my drink and I say, would you like a child development lesson? Would you like an early child development? Would you like a neuroscience lesson on early child development? And, that's what I do. In the end, I don't enjoy cocktail parties very much because I end up having to do a lot of educating. But there's so much going on in that child's emotional life and their brain that is shaping them for the rest of their lives. So a well-educated parent is a good enough parent. A parent who's ignorant as to why ignorance is your enemy with raising children. So learn about what's going on. So when you look at a baby putting something in their mouth, for the 50th time, you don't get bored and go, ho hum, here I am. Or you watch them watching the same video when they're 40 times. You don't go, I'm so bored. You actually go, I know what's going on. I know why they're doing this. I know what's happening in their brain. If you need intellectual stimulation, oh boy, there's plenty of intellectual stimulation right in front of you. You just have to know what you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to think because they're not verbal. For a lot of those first 3 years, at least not like fully communicating.
Right. So that's a projection. That's an adult projection onto an infant. That's projecting onto an infant that they're like you. They're not like you yet. And you would hope that they get enough from you that they never go up to a woman at a cocktail party and ask that question, that they can understand how important, from the moment a child is born, how impressionable they are, how much development is, how many synapses are firing every thousands, millions, And so if you're a well-educated parent, then you can find parenting maybe not as fascinating as me and my colleagues who go into it professionally, but can find it pretty fascinating.
What are the differences between a mother and a father in those early years, and what is like the research that would support that?
So mothers and fathers are not the same from a nurturing perspective. So men and women have a lot about them that can be equal. They can be equal in intelligence. They can be equal in ambition. I suppose today they can be equal athletically or physically. There's that possibility, But the reality is, from an evolutionary perspective, we are different in terms of our nurturing behaviors related to hormones. It's a biological thing. Nurturing is not a societal thing. Contrary to popular belief, it is a biological thing. We are mammals, no more and no less than any other mammal. And mammals are wired as we are wired biologically, hormonally, for certain nurturing behaviors that help our species to survive. And not just survive, but to thrive and to flourish, right? So some of those nurturing behaviors that are tied to our hormones are very different. For instance, women when they give birth. So first of all, I like the term, equal but different. Because we're equal in some ways, but very different in other ways. Now, to not believe that we're different, I know there's the whole gender movement, but here's the deal. Men, as far as I know, do not give birth to babies. Not yet. I don't think they have. But tell me if they have. Maybe if you look on Instagram, it says they have, but I don't think they have. So women give birth to babies, and there's a neurotransmitter called oxytocin, which is tied to giving birth. It's tied to breastfeeding and producing breast milk. It's tied to nurturing when mothers give birth, when they breastfeed, and when they care for their young children. They produce a lot of this love hormone, which facilitates the attachment to the baby. And there are these things called oxytocin receptors. Think of like baseball, a pitcher and a catcher, The receptors catch the oxytocin, and then the pitcher throws it back. So in every brain is a pitcher and a catcher, I guess you could say. So what you're doing is you're encouraging the development in the baby's brain of the receptors. So every time you pitch oxytocin to the baby, every time you kiss them and love them and call them sweetie and I love you, and you snuggle them and you what we call skin-to-skin contact and affection, you're growing the receptors, which allows them to pitch more and receive more, right? It's like this reciprocal thing between mothers and babies. So when mothers produce lots of oxytocin, it makes their behavior more sensitive and empathic. What does that mean? They're very attuned to the distress of the baby. When the baby cries, they're vigilant. Oh my God, my baby. Fathers, when they care for their infants, they produce oxytocin too. But it comes from a different part of their brain, and it has a different effect on their behavior. It makes them more playful tactile stimulators. Tickling, chasing, throwing up in the air, which is wonderful to encourage things like exploration, risk-taking, separation, but you don't do that with an infant, right? So when fathers grab the baby and start throwing the baby up in the air, the mothers go, no, too soon. But when children are toddlers and they're on the verge of separating and they're trying to do that kind of emotional refueling back and forth, but they're wanting to separate, then their fathers become exciting because their fathers are seducing them into the world of exploration and risk-taking, and right? So it has a different effect on fathers' brains. But fathers produce a hormone called vasopressin, which makes them protective and aggressive. It's called the protective aggressive hormone. Mothers produce it too, but fathers produce more of it. And so it affects fathers' brains by saying, all right, all you predators, out of the way. So there was a study done in England, mothers and fathers laying in bed. And when the baby cries, the father sleeps through the baby's cries and the mother wakes up. But when there's a rustling of leaves outside the window, the fathers wake up and the mothers sleep through it. So we are wired differently. And so this whole idea that we're supposed to be the same, first of all, how boring if we were supposed to be the same, but we're not the same. And so accept the differences, love the differences, cherish the differences, work with the differences, and your children will be healthy. Fight the differences. Try to make mothers into fathers and fathers into mothers. Sure, you can do it, but at what cost? And so what I would say is, yes, fathers can nurture, but if they're going to do that, if they're going to be the primary attachment figures, they have to learn how to be sensitive, empathic nurturers. So you have to teach it, right? If mothers have no fathers around, then they have to learn how to tickle and play and throw the baby up, So these can be learned behaviors, but they're not natural behaviors.
Why do you feel like it's such a contested thing of like when you start talking about these differences, especially when it comes to nurturing a child? It's like you have this whole wave of people who will be like pulling out all this research of like, no, like everybody's the same. It doesn't matter. We all have the same capabilities. And it seems like such a big conversation.
I don't know what the point of that is. It's denying our biology. It's denying, listen, you cannot change a species' biology and their evolutionary wiring in 75 years. It's going to take hundreds of years if we want to do that, or thousands of years, however long it took us to get to this point. But yeah, it's like asking penguins not to be penguins or wolves not to be wolves in their parenting behaviors, right? So I don't know why people think we're any more or less than mammals. We're another type of mammal. And so we are different. So again, can fathers be primary attachment figures? Yes, but they have to be taught to be sensitive and empathic and soothe baby's distress rather than distract or ignore or defend or, right? So the idea that you tune into baby's distress rather than distract away from baby's distress it's fighting your biology, but can you learn it? Yes, you can.
If a man is listening to this conversation or just even as a society at large, how do you hold those differences, not in a way of kind of what some woman feels like reoppressing them in some ways of saying, oh, well, there's something special about the connection with you and the baby, and so you need to stay home. But something that just kind of like honors unique contributions, like how do we hold that in a way that doesn't like activate people and like maybe even a new way to like move forward?
I think most people are not activated by, most people go, aha, that's why. But the people who are activated, usually activation means defensiveness. It means that it hit a sensitive chord in you. And so what I would say is, if you got defensive about what I just said, go and talk to somebody about it. If you're parenting and you're the primary attachment figure, I'm going to say to fathers who are the primary attachment figures, go spend a lot of time with a bubby or a really nurturing mama and watch what she does and imitate her, mimic her. Don't do what comes naturally to you as a father. If you're going to stay home with your child, then you are going to have to replace that mother and that mothering. And so observe, take it in, learn, be a good learner. And so watch how the mother, with her tone of voice, soothes the baby. Watch how the mother, when the baby is in distress, says, sweetheart, are you okay? And doesn't say, you're okay, come on, let's go. Learn, be a good learner. The same with, if it's a gay couple and two women and one of you's got to be the dad. And so watch dad behaviors. See how they tickle and run and throw the baby up in the air and, physical, playful, tactile stimulation. The idea is that children need both. There's a reason why we're different, because they need both for different things. There's a lot of single mothers who I've treated where the children sleep in their bed, attach really well, but never separate.
Yeah, it's hard to have the conversation without, we alluded to this earlier about considering the financial realities of like sustaining a family, because I'm probably the first person on the top of the list of like, sometimes I could be idealistic of what I would want to happen in a perfect world. And so there's all these negotiations that we talking about earlier about what type of lifestyle that you're going to have. If it's truly impossible for someone to sustain, if you look at rent in New York, let's just say you live in New York City, right? And so like you're looking at like a studio apartment now that's like, I don't know, it could be like $3,000 or $3,500 a month in some neighborhoods. There's all these sort of considerations. So how would you say that parents should think about that reality in terms of childcare and thinking about the possibilities of, would it be like, hey, maybe we should just like move out of the city completely potentially? Or
if it's a choice between being able to raise your own children or having to work full time, hell yeah, move out of the city.
Yeah.
Life is long and you can do a lot of things in life. Again, think seasons. So maybe you move out of the city where it's cheaper, or you live in a smaller apartment when your kids are really little that enables one of you to be home with your child. Or your children. And then as your children get older and they're in school, maybe you both can work, but one of you works part-time. I'm giving you the ideal now. What's the ideal? The ideal is that in the first 3 years, one of you is home most of the time. And then as your child goes to school, think about what school is. By the time they're 5 years old, they're in school from 8:30 to 3:30. That's 9, 3, 10, 3, 11.
It's not that many years, 3, actually. 3, yeah.
7 hours. Had to do it on my fingers, right? 7 hours a day that you can work at something. Okay. That's a lot of time. Maybe not in this society where everybody has to work 14 hours a day, but 7 hours a day is a lot of time. Find a job that you can do 7 hours a day that's within your control. The kind of work we choose. So I'll tell you my own story quickly. I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to do a lot of things. I did like a million internships before internships were a thing, but I tried all these careers on. I did an internship for a year in television production. They didn't have any lives. No lives. None of them were married, and they didn't have any lives. And the women weren't raising their own children. I was like, check, and I really liked the work. But the lifestyle wasn't for me to have a family. I worked in a law firm because I wanted to go to law school. And I saw once again, the lawyers were working 10 to 14 hours a day. The women didn't see their children all day. Crossed it out. I worked in different fields. I worked in PR, same thing. They were out every night, weren't with their kids, crossed it out. So, I think when we think about a career, men and women, you have to think, how can I make the most money and work the least hours? My husband always says that, but really it's how can I do something that allows me the control and flexibility to have children and have a family, particularly if you want to be the primary attachment figure, as I did. But that's, again, we are our choices. If you're choosing a job that's so very intense, but you're not willing to quit when you have children, then you are inherently designing a major conflict for you or designing a family that's going to have challenges.
Yeah. When I think about, your story, which, you shared in the book, I think it's really interesting because here you are, you're sitting here, you have a really successful practice. You've been doing this for almost 40 years. You're an author, burgeoning online presence of all these different things. And so
seasons.
Yeah. At some level, at some measure, you fit into kind of like this feminist ideal of a successful woman, but at the same time, you're talking about the very real realities of what it costs to raise children in these like first years. And so there's just like, I feel like there's this balance in what you're saying. Like maybe not all women should have kids, but if you're going to do it, like this is the way to do it. And you also have been very successful yourself. I just feel like it's very, I don't know, very, very balanced. I don't know. Maybe some people will still get worked up over the idea, but it's only really 3 years that you're talking about. Like
it's 3 to 5 years when you really don't have 7 hours a day to yourself. By the time they're 3 to 5, you have 3 hours a day to yourself. So it's the first 3 years that you really don't have much time to yourself at all. And then after 3, they start to go to preschool for a few hours a day. And then by the time they're 5, they're going 6 or 7 hours a day. And it's a lot of time. So pick a career where the lifestyle allows you to have a family without conflict. Or pick a career that's dynamic and hectic and chaotic and you love it. And then be willing to quit when you have children. And then figure out what you're going to do professionally when you're ready. Because, the truth is, like I said, your bra size changes. Your ambitions change a lot of times too. So you may have been an investment banker or a corporate lawyer before you had children. And then you have children and you go, hell no, I'm not going to work 10, 12 hours. I want to be with my kids. And you say, and I'm not even that interested in the law anymore. I don't want to be in a hospital doing surgery all day. What can I do with my skills? And you find a path forward that is entrepreneurial or that is different, but that suits you more. You have to go buy new bras. That would be my metaphor. Your old bras never fit you again.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because, what you were doing before, you might not want to go back to it, and it might not be conducive. And there's another woman named Nia Rook who wrote a book.
I know her.
Yeah, the Power Pause.
Did you have her on? She's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about having her on in a couple. Yeah, so I just think it's interesting because she was talking about how these kind of flexible work roles and even entrepreneurship amongst women where they could kind of maybe freelance like a few hours like a day or something like that, or kind of figure out things that they could do that would fit into that. I mean, there's the added complication of starting any business or like trying to get clients or whatever. It could be stressful.
You know what the feminist movement did, I think, that was really destructive is that it told women that caring professions, helping professions, and service fields were women's work and should be ignored in favor of men's work. Finance, law, medicine, things that were traditionally male-dominated. And sure, you can do those things. I'm not discouraging anyone from doing those things. But the truth is they don't work that well with being a mom. And the things that do work well are the caring professions, nursing, teaching, social work, speech therapy, physical therapy, caring professions where you can have your own practice and provide a service and do it in your own time, on your own terms, a massage therapist, an acupuncturist. Should I keep going? I keep going.
Yeah, there's so many.
So many. But those were considered women's work. Oh, heavens, women should do women's work. Actually, women's work is pretty darn awesome because it allows you to do your own thing in your own way at your own time so you can prioritize your children. Yeah. So it turns out they were wrong.
Yeah, I mean, even the devaluing of certain professions I find to be very ironic. I mean, we've talked about this previously with the coming AI boom, right? So you look at someone like who's like a fitness instructor, right? We would, as a society, be like, well, that's a stepping stone job or something like that. Meanwhile, someone might be in a corporate job, like hate what they do and be so burnt out and not even believe in their company's cause and be like, what am I doing with my life? And we would call that success because they're making globs of money. Whereas maybe somebody in one of these service jobs, they're interacting with people one-on-one. They're actually helping people get healthier. It's relational. But because it's not like big and glamorous and I'm making like $300,000 a year, it's like a power thing. It's like a value of power and status.
Money.
Yeah, and money
it's
as well.
Somehow money trumped, again, meaningful. So it isn't to say, so I want to correct this and say that you can be in finance and law and medicine. And I feel, who I feel the worst for? I feel the worst for doctors who are women.
Yeah.
They contact me, email me, do sessions with me. They're like, we have it the worst. And I'm like, I know. They're like, they make me go back to work, even though my job is to care for other people. They make me go back to work at 6 weeks. I hand my baby off to a daycare center or a babysitter at 6 weeks. And these are the people who are caring for you, right? So I think all of those professions, there's something implicit in them, which is that they require you, sure, you make more money, you have more, I guess, status, but what status, if you're miserable? So who cares about status and fame? And this is what we don't tell the kids. You want to be famous, you want to be rich, that often comes with loneliness and unhappiness and disconnection and, go for it. I think we don't tell them the truth.
I mean, if someone's listening and they're still like very insistent on there's a financial issue or like they're literally impossible for them if there's, and then like, okay, so what do I do? How do I be as present as possible? I'm all in on what Erica's saying about I want to raise the children well. I understand the expectations. I understand that's valuable. What
Be courageous. Be courageous. And so it used to be that you went to Fairway Market in New York. It still exists, but it doesn't exist in the same form as it did. And you'd go on a Sunday night before everybody settled into work. And the little old ladies there would elbow you out of the way. You had to be careful. They sharpen their elbows. And so I'm going to say sharpen your elbows and make space for your family. Push back, be courageous. Go to your bosses if you have bosses and say, I'm not working past 5 o'clock. I'm not working on weekends. I only want to work from 9 to 12, 5 days a week. I'm going to be home in the afternoons for my children. Use your elbows, sharpen your elbows, and be courageous and push back and find as much space as you can get for you and your baby and your family. That's what I would say to them.
What is, I mean, you alluded to this briefly, but like nannies, daycare, what is the deal there? What's happening with a child when they're interacting with those things, and how is that different than the mother or the father?
Well, daycare you shouldn't use unless you absolutely have to. And, the truth about daycare is it's institutional care. There are some home daycares that are just 1 or 2 children where it's your next door neighbor and they call them daycare. It's not really daycare. It's really extended family caring. So I have to be careful that that's not daycare. Daycare, as we know, daycare is usually a ratio of no less than 5 to 1, 5 children under the age of 3 to 1 adult, in institutional settings with transient daycare workers who are frequently sick and overwhelmed and drop out. And it's sort of the revolving door of care. You don't have consistency. You often don't have well-trained daycare workers. You don't know what the hell is happening during the day when you are not with your baby. And I'm going to say that because there's all kinds of things. I'm going to Australia this year for the second time. There are daycare sort of stories coming out right and left about sexual abuse and physical abuse and neglect. And you just don't know what's happening if that baby is not in your own home and you don't have control over that care, period. Daycare can lead to too much daycare in the early years can lead to early signs of aggression in the school years. I think it also is contributing to this ADHD crisis that we have, which is just the flight part of fight or flight. So basically, children freak out. They go into shock. You put them into a group care situation, which is overstimulating, and they're totally overwhelmed and they're fragile and they just need their mommies. And so if you just use a little empathy, you don't even need to listen to me say this. In terms of babysitters, we call them single surrogate caregivers. If you don't have extended family and you have to work, then the next best thing is to have one caregiver who is sensitive, empathic, nurturing. Pick a really nurturing woman who is going to love your baby. And then take a good look at yourself. If you're going to leave that baby with her for hours on end, that you can accept that your baby is going to get very, very attached to that woman. Maybe in some ways more attached to that woman. Because I'll tell you what happens today, and this is very common. High-powered working women hire nannies. And then the nannies are loving and sensitive and empathic. And they get very attached to the babies, and the babies get very attached to them. And they spend many more hours with that baby than the mother does. And the mother, when she realizes, she gets competitive. And she finds a small thing to fire the nanny. And then ends up hiring a nanny who is more detached, not as nurturing, not as loving, leaving the baby without a mother and without a sensitive, empathic, nurturing nanny. This is very common. That mothers feel threatened by the connection between the nanny because it's a replacement. But that's what it is. It is a replacement. You've hired your replacement. So if you're going to do that, embrace them, love them, make them the grandmother, allow for that loving relationship between the baby and accept it. Accept that you have relinquished some of that intimacy with your baby to go to work.
Now, I don't have kids yet. And, so I was new to the whole Daycare conversation, and I couldn't believe the stuff that I was seeing online of how incredibly explosive it is, talking about daycare for some reason. Why do you feel like that is? Why do you feel like people get so worked up when someone starts talking about how a lot of daycare might be not productive or harmful?
What did I say about defensiveness? Defensiveness means that you hit some sensitive chord. So it means that they feel guilty. Maybe they haven't looked at their other options. Maybe they haven't been well educated about it and they made choices. So most people defend their choices unless they're very secure and they can release their grip on those choices and say, oh gosh, I didn't know. The healthiest people that contact me are the people who say, I made a decision to use daycare before I had read your material, before I had seen the research, before I understood. Now I understand. What do I do? Those are the open people. Those are the people who are non-defensive, who say, I have regrets, I have sadness, I have remorse. And those are the people who can heal the rift with their baby. They can repair the damage with their baby. But the people who are defensive, who deny, who get angry in the response to hearing the research, those people will never be able to repair that bond with their baby because they'll never be able to take responsibility for their choice.
Yeah, I mean, as a part of it felt like a math equation when I was reading your book. Just coming at this from fresh eyes of not having children, I'm like, okay, so if I was a person who was taking care of 5 kids at once, yep. I'm just like, that feels insane to me.
Not just 5 kids, often 5 to 8 kids, and 5 to 8 often babies and toddlers.
And so then I would come across these articles of it saying, I don't know, even some reputable outlets saying oh, it's ridiculous to suggest that daycare is harmful or whatever. And so then I was going through the levels of what would qualify as good daycare or whatever. And so then you get to a point where truly good daycare is probably 10% or I don't know, 15% of what's out there. I mean, you would know better than me, but, and so I was like, wow, that is extremely small percent. So you're way more likely to get in an environment that's not going to be great.
Yeah. Which you can't control, where you don't know what's going on. It could be an abusive environment. It could be a negligent environment. Mostly it's neglectful. I would say most of them aren't abusive, but most of them are neglectful. And that means that babies cry. They cry a lot. If you go into a daycare at any time, babies are crying a lot, or they are all cried out. So the way it works is when babies are in distress, they start to cry, and then they cry louder, and then they scream, and then they go silent. So you're either going to hear excessive crying and screaming, or you're going to hear babies that are numb, that go silent, that dissociate. from their pain. And yeah, that's not what you want for your child if you want your child to be healthy.
If someone's listening and they think maybe this is trivial in the sense that, okay, there's some rough waters with daycare and the nanny or something in the first few years, but the kid will adjust after 4 years old and there won't be issues at 7 or 10 or 13. What would be your response to that?
I wish that were true, but it's not true. That's a false narrative, because children don't, in other words, the first 3 years determine a lot of their personality and a lot of their ability to regulate their emotions and their sense of security and their trust in the world. And, how do you trust in the world if your parents drop you off at a daycare when you're 6 weeks of age or 3 months of age? How do you trust the people who are meant to care for you? So you don't trust. And so, we want to raise loving, trusting, secure, emotionally secure, healthy children. And so there is a real formula for it. And if you say you're going to go off the ranch and do your own thing, you're on your own.
I mean, we alluded to your story, but I mean, how did you navigate that transition with your own work? And did you have ambivalent feelings about it that came up in the season of not wanting to let go, or all these narratives that we're talking about?
Not wanting to let go of?
Your career at that point.
So I chose my career so well that I was able to titrate it down. First, I was able to take time off and not feel guilty about it. So I took 6 months with my children. Each of them, I have 3 kids. And then I went back and saw an hour and a half of patients, 2 back-to-back 45-minute sessions a day. It was enough to pay the nanny to support me, because at some point I had 3 kids. So it was the nanny and myself co-parenting. As you go from one-on-one defense with, 1 or 2 children to zone defense, right? When you have 3 children, enough to pay the nanny. But that was it. My career was very minimal, very small. I didn't go to conferences. I didn't have much of a social life. I didn't go out to dinners with friends. I didn't, I went to my office an hour and a half a day when they were, 8 months to whatever, a year. And then slowly, by the time they were about 3 years of age, I had increased my practice to about 15 hours a week. And it pretty much stayed there throughout their childhood, about 15 hours a week. So
how old? Till they were 18?
Till they were about 16. And then I wanted to write the book earlier, but I decided not to, because it would have taken me away. So life is also the marshmallow test. It's sort of waiting. It's forestalling ambition. It's waiting. It's knowing that everything works out if you just to have a little bit of faith, if you just can wait for good things. And so, by the time they were teenagers, I was able to ratchet it up to 22 hours. And now I see 36 hours of patients a week, because my kids are out of the house and I can do that again. But the point is, there's a season to life. And what I would say, if I were to give advice to young women, would be pick your profession well. Pick something that you love, but pick something that you also love the lifestyle, that the lifestyle enables you to have a family if you want a family.
How did the media thing pick up for you? At what point did that pick up, interviews, even doing stuff like this?
Well, when the book came out, books are about the moment of gestalt in society, right? The gestalt of society at the moment. And I think that when my book came out in 2017, it was not quite yet the moment. I hadn't quite caught the wave. The book did well. I got a lot of responses. I did a lot of radio interviews. I was on Good Morning America. It wasn't as if it didn't do well. There was a little bit of media around it. The gestalt wasn't there, wasn't with me yet. Something happened. Maybe COVID helped it too. People were home with their kids.
Yeah.
And they realized how much they actually like their kids. and how much they actually like their kids more than they like their work. And a lot of women decided, I'm not going back to that office. I'm not spending hours away from my child. I'm not going to have them force me back to the office. I don't want to work full time anymore. And I think the gestalt changed. And so I would say maybe since COVID, the book sales went up, the podcast interviews went up. I also started an organization called Attachment Circles recently, which is near and dear to my heart because I was finding that women were isolated. They felt so alone if they wanted to stay home. They felt so undermined and not appreciated and not admired, but also just alone and isolated. They would go to the playgrounds and it would only be nannies if there were any children there at all, because children were being just put in daycare, like, and in a way, they were parenting alone in a way that we're not meant to parent alone. We're meant to parent in communities. And so this Attachment Circles is a platform for education. So there's lots of educational interviews and videos you can watch, and then workbooks that are used in groups. So the mothers then who are on the platform can form in-person communities, what we call play groups, where mothers and babies get together multiple times a week in each other's homes and just support one another. That was the old-fashioned way, and it's disappeared, so I'm trying to bring it back.
Well, that's really beautiful. Yeah, I mean, the power of community is amazing. I mean, there's two questions two areas I want to get to as we close. Because you make these clear distinctions in your book. How much time does a baby actually need with their mother in those first years? Because you're not suggesting that she should just be with the baby like 24/7.
So more is more.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the first year, babies like to be on their mother's body. So if you can wear your baby, it's called baby wearing, wear your baby for the first year. Get support, have your mother or a babysitter relieve you for an hour or two a day so you can take a shower, so you can go for a run, so you can, grab a cup of coffee with a friend. But yeah, babies, in the first year, babies need as much skin-to-skin contact as possible. Okay. After that, all mothers need a little space to themselves. So again, we never were meant to raise babies in isolation by ourselves. We always raise babies in extended family communities with grandmothers and aunts. And a village. So create your village. If it's a babysitter that helps you create your village. If it's a community of other mothers, if you don't have money, create a cooperative where I'll watch your baby so you can go for a run, and you watch my baby so I can go for a run, but you live next door and my baby's going to know you forever. You're Auntie Mary, that kind of thing. So the idea is, I can't give you an exact number, but what I will say is more is more. Even throughout what Margaret Mahler called rapprochement, which is like from a year to 3 years, babies are doing really from 14 months to about 3 years. They're looking back to make sure you're there, and then they're exploring, and then they're looking back to make sure you're there, and then they're exploring, and then they're coming to get a hug and get a kiss, and then they're going off to explore. That's called emotional refueling. So when you're not there, it creates a sense of loneliness and also fear. So the idea is that's a very important part. So you say the first year, you're reinforcing, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And then the second and third year, you're saying, come on, go play with friends. I'm here. I'm in the background. You can come get a hug. So the next 2 years are what we call sort of emotional refueling. But it's really important that you're there.
Now, the other piece is if someone's listening and they just feel like they completely missed the boat on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
What are the things that they could do at later ages, or maybe it's 2 now, or 2 years old, or I don't know, 8, to kind of repair that process, or anything that might not have happened?
Well, I don't often say this on podcasts, but I'm going to say it maybe for the first time that I've ever said it, which is mourn first. Go talk to somebody and mourn what you lost, because you can't get it back. What you can do is you can repair as much as you can repair, and there's quite a bit you can repair if you catch it early enough. So the earlier the better. It's sort of like a sock that gets a hole in it. If you darn the sock right away, the sock can become stronger, but if nobody darns socks anymore. But if you let the hole get bigger and bigger and bigger, the hole becomes undarnable. Or I should use the jeans hole, right? If you get a hole in your jeans, you can patch it. But if the hole gets too big, you throw away the jeans. I think the concept is that you get to it as quickly as you can and you repair it. My book has a lot about repair. But before you repair it, you have to mourn. You can't just slide right into repair. Go talk to a therapist and talk about the sadness and how you missed that period. And that will help you. That will be your guiding North Star, how to make it better.
It's beautiful. I mean, we've talked so much about like the process and the work and the challenges and even deciding to have kids to begin with. But there is something really amazing about it. You said it was the most rewarding job that you've ever had. And so if you paint a kind of hopeful picture about it, what would you say about that, about it being the most rewarding job you've ever had?
I think if you let yourself relax into mothering, it is the most incredibly connected, intimate, joyful, loving experience. If you take away the external pressures and the internal obsessions and pressures and just relax and be with your baby, being there and being present and being mindful and playing with your baby is about intimacy. And so intimacy is a wonderful thing if you allow yourself to really enjoy it. So I would say, being there is the way I would start this podcast, and being there is the way I would end it.
My last question is, if you were to think about like the next 10, 15 years, like where would you like to see like society go with this conversation and changes that could be made?
I would like to see this movement that I'm seeing grow and grow and grow, where women don't see this in a binary way, where they don't see working women as bad and stay-at-home mothers is good, or stay-at-home mothers is bad and working women is good, where women are free to make choices, but educated choices, where they prioritize relationships over their work and value the most important thing in life, because in the end, family is the most important thing in life. Relationships are the most important thing in life. And, get on that train. Don't miss that train before it's too late.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it'll bring clarity for a lot of people.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.